Are you ready to explore how people coordinate, to build and empower your community, to take action and solve problems, to coordinate without any central authority? What? Bringing in the OGs of the pre-crypto decentralized coordination space, together with the pioneers of the cutting-edge technologies, to fuse their ancient knowledge with the latest tools in order to fight coordination failures, slay Moloch, and continue the endless search for the holy grails of decentralized coordination. Welcome to the front lines of coordination. Fuck. My brain is already melting. I hope you survive.
Welcome, Richard. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm quite full of creativity and enthusiasm, and working on some cool projects. So I'm in a good mood.
Awesome. Let's not waste that enthusiasm. For those who don't know you, the reason I wanted to get you on is because you're like an OG of decentralized organizations before DAOs existed, and I think you have a lot of wisdom to share for the people in the DAO space. And do you want to give a bit more intro about yourself?
Sure. I like to say that I've been working in pre-blockchain DAOs for about 10 years, and that got started through the Occupy Wallstreet Movement, which was a DAO in the sense you had something like 1,000 cities around the world, all with Occupy actions happening, and there was no central coordination body of any kind. There was no formal procedures to join or to leave Occupy. There was no it was like a swarm. It was kind of a meme that somehow had enough coherence to get tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people activated all around the world simultaneously. And that just kind of blew my mind, basically, to just see how people could self-organize with such a tiny amount of structure, like a few memes on Twitter and YouTube and stuff. And then at the local scale, we were in a camp for a couple of months in Wellington, in New Zealand, where I'm from. And that was all run basically by consensus, which is, one way of doing collective decision-making. And in retrospect, not the only way or even my preferred way, but it's a method. And that experience being so inspiring kind of set me off on a path to go, oh, there are different ways of organizing. And maybe these different modes of organization, different from what I learned at school, what I was seeing in my engineering firm where I worked, what I learned at university. Like maybe these new forms of organization could play an important role in making society more just, more fair, more livable, more sustainable, more ecologically in touch, those sorts of things. So that inspiration kind of landed instantaneously overnight through participating in Occupy for a few minutes. And I've been on the mission ever since of just trying to make that more realistic and less utopian. So I started by building a software company called Loomio, which is a co-op. And the co-op, we made a tool for collective decision-making. I've been a really long active member in a community called Enspiral, which is kind of like a network of co-ops. And actually now we're kind of going through this conversation at Enspiral, should we just cross the threshold and become a DAO? We've already been a DAO all this time, but we didn't have the technical infrastructure. So we're having the conversation now about, do we actually want to bring people over to Web3 and move out of all of the legacy systems that we're currently using and cross the threshold into hopefully this more efficient era. So I think we know a lot about small scale, high trust, cooperative organizing. And some of those lessons would be really useful for people that are in brand new DAOs that are popping up now. But I also lack a whole lot of knowledge in what's happening at the cutting edge of these new coordination technologies. And so I'm going through this process of finding my way into Web3 and seeing what I have to offer and what I have to learn. So that's kind of what brings me to show up in this conversation with you.
Okay, that's awesome. I think these Web3 tools are definitely easier to use than it is to set up an actual decentralized organization that works and it's effective. So one question that I have, for example, is in your experience so far, would you say that decentralized organizations that really set up well Are they really as effective as centralized organizations? And if not, what's sort of the trade-off?
Well, I would say that as effective as a centralized organization is a really low threshold. Like there's consistently over the last like 3 or 4 decades, really large surveys have shown, like in the United States, for example, it's something like 75% of people are disengaged in the workforce. And disengaged, like they break it down into different categories. One category is like, I'm just passive and kind of like doing the least I can possibly do to not get fired. But then there's actively disengaged, which is like, I'm actively trying to sabotage the company's mission because I hate it here. And that's the baseline that we're talking about, is that there's a whole bunch of people on this boat. Half of them aren't rowing, 10 of them are rowing backwards, and then maybe 10 are rowing forwards. Like it's not a really high bar. I think dysfunction in groups is the kind of standard, and the dysfunctions we see in decentralized organizations are just a bit different. It's like the difference between being a doctor and being a vet, right? Like all humans and animals all get sick, but they have slightly different sicknesses that they have to worry about. So I don't really come in with the sense of like, oh, decentralized organizations are superior to centralized organizations. It's more like they're better suited to people with a specific set of values. So for instance, I've got values that really prioritize people's agency, their autonomy, their independence. And then building up from that autonomy, there's the sense of solidarity, of enthusiastic consent, of opting in to taking care of each other and supporting each other. And that's built on top of the autonomy. And in a decentralized organization, it's a much better context for me to exercise those values. But for people with different values, maybe they'd rather have centralized leadership and a really clear chain of command that they can follow. So yeah, I don't want to claim superiority. It's just that it's more like it's a better fit for certain types of people.
Right. And it just feels so much better. Like for me personally, like even if they were less effective, like I would still choose to work in a decentralized organization, because it feels better to not have that whole chain of command and hierarchy, and having some autonomy. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what your core needs are, right? So for me, what I've noticed in retrospect is the needs that I'm trying to meet. Basically, it comes down to a certain kind of belonging, of a sense of I have a place here. People know me and I know them. And that sense of belonging includes a sense of contribution, that I've got a meaningful role to play here, that I can be of benefit to the people around me. I can contribute to the problems I see in the world and be constructive and be like inspired and show initiative. Those are the kind of the core needs that have been motivating my experimentation with different forms of organizing structures. And I think it makes sense to prioritize those core needs. And if you are prioritizing these things of like belonging and meaningful work, you might not be prioritizing profit or a certain kind of efficiency. But that's a trade-off I'm really happy to make, because like you said, it feels good.
Right. Yeah. Much more meaningful and wholesome. But yeah, that definitely seems to be like the most often heard criticism, is that people say, oh, like decentralized organization, they just can't be as effective. But then, yeah, I've read the Team of Teams book that you recommended about the US military, which is like traditionally thought of as the most hierarchical possible organization, and how they themselves had to like adopt more horizontal approaches to some of the things that they are doing to actually fight the war in Iraq.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, because it sort of highlights how almost everyone has really naive ideas about organizations, myself included. So I naively assumed that the US Army would be like super hierarchical. And of course, it's had that history, and it still does have some really strong hierarchical components to it. But also in the last decade or so, especially, it's really been pioneering ways of organizing that prioritize the intelligence and the autonomy of the people at the so-called bottom of the hierarchy. So it just shows, I think, that this kind of simplified narratives you often hear in the DAO space and all the hype and so on doesn't really stand up to a closer examination. And if we allow ourselves to go and explore and to learn from lots of different sources, then we find, wow, there's lots of people that have thought really deeply about the problems of organizations, and there's lots of lessons lying around all over the place, including in the army. I always like comparing the Team of Teams book from General McChrystal in the army to Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, because she's like, at the moment, she's probably one of the leading thinkers and organizers in the world of like social justice organizing coming from North America, which is kind of like the opposite end. If you thought about like a political spectrum, like the US Army on one side and then social justice organizers on the other side. And her book, Emergent Strategy, just names all of these principles of organizing, which General McChrystal would agree with 100%. It's really fun to like discover, that there's knowledge everywhere, that there's smart people everywhere. They're just dressed up in different values and different kind of tribal clothing.
Right. Yeah, I saw your tweet that was about how you read both of those books and how it was mind-blowing to you that they basically come to the same conclusion. And then I had to go read both of those books as well. And yeah, they're really good.
I think actually it's probably worth, assuming that most of the people listening are kind of into DAOs to some depth, then I can assume that they have a certain set of values. And maybe it's worth taking a minute to consider the benefits of hierarchy, just to like, counterbalance it a little bit. So one thing that's been on my mind a lot lately is the way that, my training is in engineering. So, and in university, I was doing things like building robot arms, right? And you need a robot arm has all of these axes and all of these segments. And you want to be able to coordinate it in a unified fashion where you can kind of address all of the parts individually or all as a whole. Or if you just think about your human arm, you've got that little end of your fingertip, which you might use for like clicking your mouse. And then you've got your whole hand, and then you've got your forearm, and then your whole arm, and then your body. Like you've got these different scales of actuator. So depending on the task, whether it's moving your mouse or like picking up your coffee or going to the bathroom, you sort of address different scales to achieve the outcome that you're looking for. And that's what armies are so good at, is they can switch from moving the whole arm, so like there'll be some tactics where the army needs to move an entire platoon simultaneously, and then there'll be other tactics where you really need to be moving in these little, what they call a fire cell. I think they call it a fire cell, like a group of 4 people. And depending on the tactical circumstance you're in, like who should you be listening to your local leader, or do you need to actually skip up 2 or 3 levels of the hierarchy to listen to that and move as a unified whole? And that's a huge competitive advantage, to be able to address different kinds of terrain and different kinds of strategic context that you're going to be in. And so for those of us who are in the decentralized organizing world, it's kind of like we're obsessed with the fingertip. It's like, I want to be in my small group. Or for some people, it's like, I want to just be completely independent, just me. A lot of other people are like, I can handle being in a group of 5 people or 50 people. We'll be the unit, but I'm not willing to concede any authority to any groups larger than that. And it's like, that's awesome, because you do have so much collective intelligence and autonomy at that really micro scale. But it does mean that we're not able to move as a coordinated whole, when I think sometimes the kind of challenges we're facing, they do require a coordinated large scale maneuver. And that's when you have things like, protocols and standards and people like trying to build agreement. And we tend, the people that are put so much emphasis on like individual liberty and autonomy and freedom, they have a really hard time coming together and building large scale agreements so that we can march together as a single unit when we need to. That's like the trade-off we usually make.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of people even go as far to say that, the decentralized organizations shouldn't even have any leaders. And that's just like, that's not how it works. But yeah, the way that we solve this in Metagame is that we have somewhat static leaders. Like anybody is free to like take charge of something, especially if it's something that nobody else is doing yet. But like different functions and different projects have their what we call champions, which are sort of in charge of making sure that the things keep rolling. And then we have the champions ring, which is a group of all the leaders that then talk about the more strategic stuff. But it's all like, to some people in the DAO space, that automatically sounds hierarchical, but it's like we discuss, the champions need to agree, and then the champions aren't like, hey, like people who are working in the project that I'm a champion of, like, you need to do this. It's more like, hey, we discuss this, we think we should do this, and then they discuss and see like if other people also like that, and then they proceed. There's no like, okay, the people like quote unquote higher up decided this, now you have to do this. But I wonder how do you do that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think what you described sounds quite familiar to me and a lot of the organizations that I work in. And this question of whether it's hierarchical or not kind of doesn't feel that helpful. It kind of feels like it's not that useful about a unit of analysis. I kind of need to get into a bit more detail. So like, okay, it might be hierarchical in the sense that there are some people that, you've specialized into different roles. There's some people that have a bigger picture than others. Some people are working on their little tight scope and other people are looking at how all the parts fit together. But when people say like, oh, I don't like that, it's hierarchical, I think you've just got to get a bit more detail about what the objection is. Because if the objection is just, I don't like the shape of it, well, it's not very convincing. But often what people are pointing to, I think, is about power dynamics. It's like, does this person control me? Like, am I being coerced by the structure? Do I have freedom? And generally, one of the exciting things about the whole Web3 space in general is because you have such open entry and ease of exit, the ability to be coercive is vastly reduced compared to lots of other kinds of organizations. There's like such low friction to get in and to get out that it's like, I'm willing to delegate some of my autonomy to you and to follow your decision to an extent. But as soon as you lose my trust, I can just quit. And it's really easy to do that. So whereas in most jobs, for example, quitting is a really dramatic, it's a really difficult thing. And so therefore traditional organizations tend to be much more coercive because they've kind of got you, they've kind of hooked you in, and so they can, bend you off the path of your autonomy that you would naturally take on your own. I think it is worth, getting into the detail and thinking about what are some of our complaints with hierarchy? What are the things that go wrong? And then design specifically risk mitigation strategies, So like one of my complaints is someone at some stage in the past, perhaps, even taking an appreciative look, maybe they earned a position at the top of the hierarchy, but that was 10 years ago. And things have moved on and tons of other people have learned a bunch of stuff and the context has moved, but they've still got that position because, well, they earned it sometime in the past. And so this thing of like a static position, I think, is kind of an anti-pattern, and it's maybe more useful to have roles that are temporary. So like the most recent example I've got is I hosted an event recently for our community, and there's like 20 people there. I was one of the co-hosts. There's a few of us. I did quite a lot of the work to like organize. And because I was organizing, I also got quite a lot of the decision-making power to say, this is what we're doing and this is what's not going to happen here. And if I was always doing that, then, well, that wouldn't be the kind of community I want to participate in for long. But at the end of the event, then some other people put their hands up to say, I would like to host the next one, right? So we have this like temporary, rotational, shared leadership where, it's okay for someone to have some extra responsibility and therefore some extra privileges for a time. And we're going to we don't just randomly kind of rotate people in and out. We also have like at the next event, I'll be there in the background. I'll be providing advice or support or like just trying to be useful to next year's hosts. So there's a kind of, I have a role to download what I've learned, but I'm not giving them permission. I'm not authorizing their action. I'm just playing a supporter's role. And that feels like a pretty healthy way of getting the benefits of hierarchy without I think it mitigates some of the risks of how those hierarchies tend to go wrong. And there's probably tons of those kind of, like if you really go in with some deep listening and some kind attention and you say, okay, tell me about your fears around hierarchy, you can probably get people to unpack in quite a lot of detail some of the different concerns they have. And then it comes to a question of like, well, okay, what are we designing? What needs do we have? Because obviously you designed this champions ring because there was a need that was there. And so it's like, can we meet this need in a way that seems good enough, safe enough? Like, is it safe enough to try? Does this help or does this hinder in the long run? But you always find through this work that you're making trade-offs. You're trading off between different values. And the question is like, is this a good enough trade-off to get us to the next step?
Right. I think in our case, we didn't really have even we still don't have we're still missing some champions, but enough people that are competent to take on these different championing roles. But also people naturally kind of fade out, new champions fade in, so they come in, and so it's not really static, and there's this natural rotation, because people who leave rarely come back to be a champion again. But there's a change. We have this concept of challenging a champion. So if people don't like the way the champion is acting, or if he's trying to impose stuff, or he's not doing his job or whatever, then that champion can be challenged and replaced, or voted out. But we haven't done that ever so far. And also each one has, well, not each one, but the idea is that each one should have a deputy, so that if he can't fulfill his role, then other person can jump in, and then that other person can become the champion or whatever. But yeah, I definitely agree that these things shouldn't be static.
Just hearing you say that, I like the deputy idea. I would probably, rather than just making the specific case of challenging a champion, I would normally think about it in terms of just conflict resolution for everyone. That one of the requirements for this organization is we need a certain degree of trust between each other. And if trust breaks down between two people, that's actually a really significant problem. That's kind of one of the generator problems that cause all the other problems. And so you can make it a requirement of entry. If you're going to be participating here, you have to participate in the conflict resolution process as well, which means anyone can challenge anyone and say, I think what you're doing is shitty, and we need to have some kind of mediated process to rebuild trust between us. This is one of the ingredients that old traditional organizations worked out long ago, is you need to have some kind of mechanism for dealing with conflicts. And in DAO space, you mostly, like I said, you mostly just have people quitting. That's the usual way that conflicts get dealt with, which is just not, it's not, and voting, which neither of those are really ideal.
A lot of voting.
There needs to be ways, sometimes we talk about conflict transformation, which is even not just conflict resolution as in, oh, the pain has gone away, but there's actually a way of seeing conflict as a growth opportunity. So it's we've had some kind of rupture in trust, we've had some kind of breakdown, we have some sense of offense or harm has been done. And then the process of reviewing that and coming back into trust, we can actually, both parties can learn in the process, and the system can learn. And often the conflict has come from a missing piece of our protocol, for example. And we can notice if we'd put this system in place, then this conflict wouldn't have arisen in the first place. And so conflict can be a really juicy source of innovation. And if you've got a space where people can be honest about the tensions that they're experiencing and their frustrations, you can process those tensions and turn them into innovations in a really rapid and quite sustainable way.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think in this space, people generally as the conflicts arise, they mostly just move their own separate ways and not try to, because there's so many other projects that they can be working on and whatever. And in general, not just in conflict resolution, but there's generally a lack of reflective practices on things that we've done, and always we need to push forward, and always just pushing forward and not doing enough reflection.
Yeah, I mean that's one of my main talking points, I guess. If I had to summarize all of the things that I've learned in the last 10 years of decentralized organizing, it always comes down to two core principles. And one is build trust and then repair trust when things go wrong. And then two is reflect and run experiments. And that, when we were starting out with Loomio, it was basically up to about 20% of our time was spent on looking at how we're working and trying to find ways of doing better working. And if you think about a traditional organization, it's quite common that they'd have 20% of their people in management roles, at least 20%. And so then we go okay, we're going to be decentralized, we're going to be self-managing. That just means you get rid of all the managers, but some of the work that managers do is actually important.
Right.
And it needs to go somewhere.
Right.
And it's easy to just, kind of go off the deep end and throw the baby out with the bathwater. But it's actually really useful to stop and reflect. Thinking back on the last week of working together, what was really good? What should we celebrate? And maybe even not just celebrate, but write it down somewhere and say, this is a standard operating procedure now. This is something that works really well, and everyone should know about this. That's one good thing to discover through reflection. And then the second question is like, what's not going so well? What felt inefficient or frustrating, or like, when did you get really bummed out, or like, what was the low light of your week? Let's hear about that too, because often in these frustrations, especially if you're hearing about them quickly, that they're not festering and developing and turning into like really nasty conflicts and frustrations. But if they're just small tensions, you can almost always find a quick solution. And if you're doing that process really rapidly, like with a full-time working team, I'd usually do it once a week or once every 2 weeks. They would have this conversation about what's going well and what's not going so well. You can just come up with small innovations and small changes all the time and get into a process of constant improvement, continuously making adjustment to your ways of working, not just the thing you're working on, but how you're working together. And it's so, yeah, when a team really gets into that mode, it's so exciting. It feels so energizing to be like, hey, this thing pissed me off, but I know that at the end of the week, we're going to have this conversation, and the thing that pissed me off is going to turn into some kind of change. Like that's such a, it's a really inspiring context to work in.
That's a great point. We definitely should be doing some of that, like being more intentional about that, because like we have this like issues channel where people are supposed to post the things that they don't like, but people generally don't really share something that annoys them until it's already like really, really frustrating and it's become a big problem. Like, yeah, generally need to be invited to share what's on their minds, what is bothering them.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much, like a lot of this is central to the whole world of like Agile management. And so if you search for like Agile retrospective meetings, for example, you'll just find a bazillion different templates for like, how do you host that conversation in a really productive way? Like I've been involved with tons of these Agile retros, and some of them are really good. You know, it can be as simple as thinking back on the last week, draw a line on your journal, and like the line goes up when you were happy and the line goes down when you were sad. And then looking back on that, is there anything you want to talk about? You know, like that's such a simple technique to get you thinking, both in terms of highlights and lowlights, and bring to the surface the conversations we need to have.
Right. And you reminded me before, you mentioned the trust a bunch of times, and I also noticed that in the books that I read and like things that I read online about decentralized organizing, like before the DAOs, there's a lot of focus on trust and like building trust between people, and that being like the fundamental part of an organization. While in the DAO space or like crypto space in general, there's all this focus of, oh, this is a trustless technology. And so there's this thinking that the DAOs should also be used to build organizations without needing trust. Like you can build organization without trusting people and all that sort of thinking.
Yeah. I mean, this is one point actually where I feel like I've got something to learn. And probably a lot of DAO folks have something to learn here too, and we could meet in the middle. I think the concept of trustlessness, I just don't get it. I don't really understand what's the appropriate context for trustlessness, because to me it's always like you got to trust, you know, it's like you got to at least trust that the smart contract is not going to get hacked or something, you know. But I think that's just because I'm straw manning the idea of trustlessness. But on the other hand, like the work that I've done is just so much about cultivating trust at the small scale. So like one of what I call like the first principle of social physics is that the amount of trust you can have in a group decreases with the square of the members. So like the two of us can get to know each other, spend a bit of time, takes a few hours, but then we get a sense like, okay, this person's trustworthy. I want to spend time with them. I want to work with them. You can come and stay in my house, whatever. But when you have 5 people, you know, that's already like, okay, the number of relationships between 5 people goes up in an exponential way, right? And then you get to 50 people. It's like, it just takes so long for 50 people to develop trust with 50 other people. It's just like a huge amount of work. And so you don't expect 50 people to really get to know each other with a great deal of depth before they can work together. You kind of like download some of that trust or delegate some of that trust to your protocols and your structures. And you say like, okay, I don't know this person intimately, but at least we've both agreed to abide by this protocol. And I trust that if their behavior deviates from that protocol, there's going to be a system that corrects them. Like that part is really clear to me and it makes sense. But the part where I feel like my knowledge is really lacking and I'm like, only got half ideas at this stage, is like when you get really into much larger scales, you know, like I said about Occupy, there was a way in which all of these people were coordinated, but there was no trust, you know, there was no pre-existing relationship. It was more like all of these people were responding to the same signals with the same action. It's like what they call stigmergic collaboration, like this emergent property. But there was some kind of signals in the ecosystem. We all responded to that, and then we left our own signals, and then people were responding to those signals in this feedback loop. That was not trust-based. It was more like, oh, I recognize myself, or I see that you're doing the thing that I want to do, or, you know, there's like some kind of signaling going on. And I think at the large scale, that's what crypto can really help with. But I just don't understand the space well enough to really have crisp mental models for thinking it through.
Right. Yeah, I think some of it comes back all the way from like Bitcoin, and like the fact that like a lot of the, if not all of the very early community were people who were technical, and they were like, I don't have to trust you because I can read the code and the code says this, and yeah, there's no need to trust. And then going onwards, like with smart contracts, we can all check if the smart contracts do what they say they do. They just like, if you can understand how to read them, then you don't have to trust them. But like when you start to scale, then like, yeah, most people don't actually know how to read smart contracts. And even if you do, you're not going to read a smart contract of every application that you're using every day. And it just kind of, the whole idea kind of breaks down in my mind.
Yeah, I'm definitely focused on the other end of the scale, where the question is like, how do we cultivate trust? Because trust is really nice. You know, right? You think about, I was watching a film last night, which was kind of about the end of the world. And if you think about a situation where, you know, the law has kind of broken down, there's no police anymore. It's like, you want to be in a place where there's a high degree of trust, you know, where there's a high degree of social capital, where people care about their neighbors. You don't want to be in a trustless society at that point.
Right. Yeah. And I had some trouble when I was traveling to Lisbon. I got stuck in the UK, and I received help from a colleague here in Metagame called Luxambra, I don't even know his real name. I've never seen his face, but over the time that we worked together, we established trust, and like he was willing to give me his like credit card info to get unstuck from the airport, because that's trust, and it's kind of even builds in a weird way, because you don't even have to know like real names and all of that, and you can still establish it.
That's been amazing for me, just as a side effect of the pandemic, like meeting all these people exclusively online. And then like I was in Berlin a couple of months ago, and I went and stayed at someone's house that I'd only met online. We'd never had face-to-face contact. And he wasn't even in their house at the time. He just like left the keys out for me. So I'm like in this space, which for some people, you know, is a really high threshold of trust. And we've just cultivated this through a long distance virtual relationship. It's like, yeah, that to me is, that's the fun. That's the juice. Like that's what life is. Yeah. Makes life worth living for me.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It really makes you like, goddamn. Yeah. Thanks, man, again, if you're listening. I wanted to also go back to voting. Yeah, like you said that it's not an optimal solution for conflict resolution, and I've heard this from a bunch of people as well, and how like voting creates winners and losers, and if it's democratic, like it only takes a bit more than 50%. So like, how do you better do things without voting? We try to really minimize voting by people having as much autonomy as possible. But then there are things that are like contentious and that affect the whole community, and that's when we resort to voting. But
yeah, I think this is one of these instances where the technological affordances have kind of distorted people's way of thinking a bit. This is what I've noticed coming into crypto land, is like you kind of get a bit intoxicated. There's all these ideas and opportunities, and they kind of make you a bit stupid in some ways. Or it just frames your, it's maybe stupid, it's not a nice way to put it, but it just like frames your thinking so strongly that it's hard to see the alternatives. But what I see in DAOs that are into voting, it's like they think that a vote is a way to make a decision. And if you can kind of step out of that context, you realize that's really not how decisions happen. As generally, like decisions usually have this whole period of, well, first there's often one or a couple of people who spot an opportunity or a need. So there's like some kind of, unique role for an initiator or someone who spots an opportunity. And then there's a whole period of deliberation. And an effective decision, that deliberation process is going to involve visiting different stakeholder groups, even kind of knowing who the different stakeholder groups might be, and then visiting them and updating the proposal based on what they tell you. Or like, even if you don't formally visit them, you might imagine in your head, like, okay, I've got these developers to think about, and these users to think about, and these investors to think about. What are they all going to need to see on this proposal? And you're updating based on your model of what they might think. And also there should be a period where it's like, hearing for strong concerns or objections and integrating, if you're creative, and like I say, if there's a critical mass of trust in the group, those kind of objections can be integrated in a really constructive way. And you can say, not just, you oppose this proposal, but I oppose it for this reason. These are the principles that are at stake, and I could accept it if these changes were made. That's a whole creative way to frame an objection. It's like what we call disagree by contribution. So like you're saying, this is how it would improve it for me. And then once you've gone through all of that consensus building, and I mean consensus in the rough sense of the word, like a loose sense of agreement, then often the decision kind of happens effortlessly. If you can show people, this is the process I've been through, this is what people think about it. It's kind of like you don't need to vote at that point if people trust the process. And then critically, there's the next bit, which is like I was saying about the retrospectives, there's this moment of evaluation that comes afterwards, which is like, was that a good decision? Did we do the thing we said we did? Did it have the outcomes that we expected it would have? And that evaluation is immediately feeding into the next deliberation and decision-making process, because you're like, I'm developing a reputation for being the kind of person who brings well-formed proposals, or I'm not. I might develop a reputation for being someone who has like really cool ideas but never follows through. And it's going to have a huge impact on your decision making. And so like, if the only tool you have is a vote, you kind of miss out on both of those preceding and steps and the ones that come afterwards. And it gives you this very narrow frame for thinking about how decisions actually work in practice. And if you're working with, less than 100 people or less than 200 people, it's very rare, I think, that you'd need to go to a vote for anything. Maybe you can go for a consent, you can sort of check, hey, we're about to do this. Does anyone have a strong objection? But that's not so much about like counting up the number of votes that people supporting. That's more like giving people an opportunity to veto. So I'm sure there are some contexts where it makes sense to go to a vote, but they're quite rare. Yeah, I think they need to be sort of like defined by exception. Like this is when votes are useful, but I don't think anyone really enjoys running an organization by voting.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of resorting to voting in the DAO space. I think like by consent, it's also depends on like if a strong objection can really veto the thing, then the problem is like if you have a lot of people who are sort of on the fringe of the organization, which tends to be a lot of people. Like at least in our case, there's maybe like 10 people who are really, really active, and then there's 80 people who are somewhat active, and in them there are like people who only come here for like once a week to write something on Discord or whatever, and then you can have somebody who's really uninformed or whatever to veto your decision.
Yeah, again, I mean, this is something that has been worked out in other kinds of organizations, and we don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, so like probably the best frame I know for this comes from multi-stakeholder co-ops, where you have to think about there's different classes of participants, and it's logical to give them different rights and responsibilities. And so I would hope that's the way that DAOs are evolving, to say, like there's a core contributor who is working on this thing full time and has complete knowledge, complete context about the space they're in. And then there's someone who's made a financial contribution but has no real insight into what's happening. And then there's someone who's like a user of the product and has some insights, but like there's these different kind of classes. And in a way you want to involve people in the decision making, sure, but it doesn't make sense to give everyone veto power over every type of decision. It doesn't make sense to give the users veto power about some back-end engineering decision. But you do want to have a really coherent understanding of what their needs and desires are. That's really crucial. So I think it makes sense to map out these different classes of stakeholder. There's a legal model that has been developed in the UK called Fair Shares. So if you go to fairshares.coop, they have defined a kind of template for multi-stakeholder co-ops, and I think that could be ported over quite easily into DAO space. And like in their case, I think the categories are like the founding, like core contributors, and then any investors and funders, and then other workers who've sort of showed up a bit later, and then the users or customers. And if you just think in those terms, I think that's already a good place to start from, about like what kind of responsibilities and rights should each of those categories have, and just bringing that conversation together, I think then would shape when should we bring a proposal to which group, and like who should have decision-making authority.
Right. Yeah, there's so much existing knowledge. I've shielded your handbook of handbooks a lot, but I feel like not many people in DAO space actually go to read that sort of thing. We just start doing things because we have this sort of thinking that the DAO is this framework for voting and minting tokens, and then we have to build this product, and those are like the things that matter. But yeah, basically what we vote on is the treasury spending outside of the regular paying inside Metagame, which happens through a semi-automatic system. But like for spending outside Metagame, and like some decision like, okay, we have these 5 different logos, and the designer doesn't want to pick one, so I have the community pick one. And I kind of followed what I did with my previous proposal is that I wrote what I thought would be important, but I didn't know what people would be worried about. And then I passed it on as a sort of a soft proposal for signaling and getting more feedback. And then there was a lot of feedback on the forum thread. And then I took all of the feedback that I got from the forum thread and like addressed it and put the things that I addressed, like updated the proposal itself, which like doubled in size basically to address all the concerns. And then tagged people again to vote, and then the vote flipped from no to yes.
Yeah, great. And probably this also means that your next proposal that you bring is more likely to pass as well, right? Like assuming people had some confidence in the process that you went through, it's like you've earned some reputation and some trust, and like that influences the next proposals that come your way.
You're right, and if it goes well. But for that, we need proper reflection. Otherwise, people don't know.
Yeah, because it will happen implicitly, that people will kind of start to get a feel for who's trustworthy and who's accountable and who delivers. But it's really, really difficult to read, and that's why like having these explicit reflective moments makes that kind of metadata much more transparent.
Yeah, I found that some people vote without even reading. Like they just read what the proposal is about, like the name of the proposal basically, and don't just vote. Don't read the actual forum thread, which kind of sucks. But yeah, like when it comes to actual voting, so yeah, there's this whole the split that the editor will hate me because I basically talk about a similar thing with every guest that I talk about with DAOs. But I see this sort of split in the DAO space between the people who see DAOs as a technology and people who see DAOs as a philosophy, like a philosophy for organizing. And there's like, I don't know, it's like almost 50-50. A lot of people leaning on the technology side, and even on the philosophy, a lot of people don't really have a clear idea. But the thing is that a lot of people are like, oh, your DAO is only a DAO if it has a DAO contract on chain. And then like even if it's actually plutocratic and like it's whales hold all of the tokens and you vote with tokens, that doesn't matter. Like it's still a decentralized organization because it's on chain. But if you're off chain and you run democratically, you're still not a DAO. And then there's this whole weirdness for me around that. And generally, like when I was first hearing about DAOs, they were before the DAO frameworks even existed, like 2016. People were talking about the upcoming of DAOs as these sort of like democratic organizations. But then, like most of them are plutocratic and they just do voting, and how many tokens you have, that's how many votes you have. Yeah, in a way, this could end up just being like on-chain traditional corporations.
Yeah. For me, like I've seen this debate play out in open source free software. I've seen it play out in cooperatives. Like, do you have to legally incorporate as a cooperative before you call yourself a cooperative. There's this kind of like obsession with the noun, like the DAO or the co-op, to me is like missing the point. And it's more interesting to think about like, what are the core principles that we're talking about here? And what are the verbs? Like, what are we actually doing? And in the example of a cooperative, it's like, there's some really well articulated principles about what it means to be a cooperative, and it doesn't involve anything to do with your legal structure. I mean, it implies a lot about your legal structure, but the important thing is, do you follow these principles? Not have you got this particular signature on this particular document? I think it's the same with DAOs. Like, it's useful to have this conversation about how organizations could be different, how they could prioritize much more autonomy, how they could be much more efficient, much more life-giving, like whatever principles you want to attach to it. I think that's really useful. But to have a competition about like defining who's in and who's out of the DAO conversation doesn't seem very fruitful. It seems like a really attractive, pointless debate.
Right, but the problem is like what even is attached to this? Because some people think that all it is literally is the like a smart contract, like or a group of smart contracts that's meant to run them, and it really doesn't matter if they are politically decentralized or they are just architecturally decentralized.
I think this is just the natural process of emergence. Like there's a bunch of fuzziness and vagueness, and it's going to crystallize in time into more specific terminology. So right now, with the state of the conversation, as far as I've been, I've entered in the last couple of months and looking around, and it seems like people, when they say DAO, what I imagine there is not a specific smart contract. What I imagine when they say DAO is this like empty parentheses. It's like this container which is infinitely flexible, and it holds people's hopes and dreams about how organizations could be done differently. And that's a useful thing. Like, I'm not shitting on it. Like, it's really useful to talk about our hopes and dreams for how organizations could be different, but it doesn't give us design specs. We need to go into another layer of detail and understand what are people's values and their motivations and their principles. What are we trying to achieve? And over time, that'll standardize into different patterns. And you'll have ones that are like more plutocratic. Maybe that's the appropriate form for some kinds of organization. And then you'll have other ones that are much more like communist, and you'll have ones that are more anarchist, and there's going to be different flavors. And I guess they'll get different names as the patterns start to stabilize a bit more.
Right. Yeah, I think they're definitely like the DAOs that should be plutocratic. Like, if you have an investment DAO, then it makes complete sense that the people with money decide where the money goes. But yeah, the word itself is kind of becoming meaningless. And I'm like, originally when I was thinking like, oh, like I should really argue with people about this and talk about all of this, like how the DAOs doesn't matter if they're on-chain, they should be actually decentralized politically, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, I'm kind of just slowly stopping to use the word DAO itself. Just say Metagame is a decentralized organization, or like we are a decentralized organization, not we're a DAO, or this is a DAO, this is not a DAO.
Yeah, I really love the connection as well with Taoism, because you can say, the DAO that can be named is not the eternal DAO. It's like a really good sort of philosophical spin on that. I think the way to win this argument is just to show people how to do it. It's so much more convincing to argue by running code rather than having a strong argument in theory. Just show us the practice.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people talking about what DAOs should be are actually the people who never built a DAO. That's also fairly interesting. It's only become really popular in the past few months and blowing up, and a lot of people they're like self-proclaimed experts, but not many successful DAOs even have been built in like totality. This kind of is a good way to segue into like, yeah, what sort of the thing that you think we're kind of being too optimistic about, or too utopian in this, not necessarily just the DAO space, but we can include the crypto space in general if you want.
I mean, I want to give a shout out to utopians, right? Like, I do, as you said, I'm an OG, I'm an old granddad. I've been doing this for 10 years. And so I'm kind of jaded in some ways. And I really do see the value of a kind of naive enthusiasm. It's like you need people getting on with it and building stuff that other people think is impossible or unrealistic. That's so crucial to have people doing that. So I don't want to disrespect anyone just because I think their ideas may be a little bit too crude or a little bit naive. Like, it's actually really a crucial ingredient, because so much of innovation is driven by a kind of naive enthusiasm. So go for it. But I guess it needs to be tempered maybe, or, well, even that, I think there's a whole bunch of lessons that you can only learn the hard way. Like, one really good example is the tyranny of structurelessness, which is like so beautifully articulated. What was it, like 50 years ago, the essay was written. And every decade, there's like a whole mass movement of people that learn the lesson again. And it just doesn't seem like the output of that essay has turned into a meme. Only the input has, only this attempt of like, oh, we'll get rid of hierarchy and then we'll have freedom and equality. And it's like, oh, it didn't work. and when I say, oh, it didn't work, it's like a really painful, excruciating process of people getting burnt out and having like real dramatic conflict and huge amount of drama to come to that conclusion. And people just keep going around that loop over and over and over and over again. It seems like a natural part of the developmental journey. It's like a baby is going to fall on his face 58,000 million times before he learns how to walk. And you can't skip it, but you just got to fall on your face a bunch. So I don't want to discourage people from not being able to walk properly or something, it's like, it's fine. It's fine. And it seems like that there's this threshold of you've fallen on your face enough times that you start to go like, wait a minute, can someone help? Has anyone else thought of these problems before? Am I missing something here? Is there someone that can show me how to walk? And when you get to that stage, then I've got lots to say. But I think there's a lot of people I've encountered so far in the DAO space that are not really at that point. They're in the like, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to figure out my own way. And everything that that I inherited from my school or like implicitly from my culture, like it's obviously corrupt and bullshit. So why am I going to listen to someone else? I'm going to go build my thing. And that's great. Go for it.
Right. But do you think we would still benefit if like these sort of resources? I mean, yeah, you obviously think because you compiled a bunch of resources.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, I think, maybe to look at the sequence of, how my theory of change has evolved implicitly. Like first it was, I'm going to build this coordination software and that's going to help groups to be more efficient collaborators. And then I moved on from Loomio to The Hum, which has basically been doing training work and a bit of consulting and, facilitation and support and stuff, but mostly training. Hey, look, if you want to have a decentralized organization, these are all the skills you need. You need to know how to do decision-making and conflict resolution, and you need to know how to give and receive feedback. You need to know how to learn and to update your agreements and all this. And I think both of those layers are useful, both the software and the human software, the skills. But now where most of my work is focused is on micro-solidarity, which is actually about intentionally building the culture required to animate those organizational structures and to animate that software. And that feels like I'm getting deeper and deeper down the stack. And they're all useful. I think they all make a positive contribution. But just personally, my enthusiasm right now is like much more in this cultural layer than it is anywhere else.
Right. From software to human software.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm a layer zero geek. I think that's just my thing.
All right. And the meta. How do I frame this question better? That's the right question. But yeah, how do you think we can use this to actually affect change, and like to what degree is this like really something that can actually change things?
Well, I think it's really quite convincing when I see people framing the challenges in the world in terms of coordination failure. Like, I think that's a useful diagnosis. It's not the only one, but it's a really good one. And therefore, I'm really optimistic to see people experimenting with new forms of coordination. And so I think there is reason to have some hope. And then they're not just experimenting in theory, but in practice with like huge treasuries. Like I was talking to someone, maybe I don't know if this is public, so I won't share the name, but with an organization that's hoping to deploy $300 million to be community controlled over the next 2 years. It's like, we're really doing high stakes experimentation here. So that gives me a lot of hope. And I've just been saying lately, like, it's good to have opinions about how we could organize the world differently. And like I've already said on this conversation, a lot of people arriving to that conversation are naive, and it's a positive naivety, but still it does lack a lot of wisdom. And therefore, you really want to measure people's opinions against their expertise and their competence. And so it's like, show me how to organize 50 people and how to do that efficiently and effectively over a sustained period. And then I'm going to really want to know what you think about how we organize 5 million. But there's very, very few people that know how to organize 50 people. That's already a very narrow little band. And so I'm kind of like, yeah, go off and show me and get those skills down. And you're going to learn a whole bunch about the key trade-offs and how your mental models were letting you down and all the things that you were overlooking and taking for granted in the process. And for me, at least, it makes sense to like start at that really small scale and just step up one scale at a time. And in the process, you're probably going to have a much more nuanced view than what you had when you showed up.
Right. It just sounds so much simpler. Like, I'm still super naive, but how naive I was when I started Metagame is like not measurable to what I'm thinking now. Like when I started, I just expected things to be a lot easier and a lot simpler, and I thought, you just explain an idea. If you inspire people, they will just the coordination will happen. People will start coordinating, start doing things, and things will just happen. But it's just not how it worked out. The massive online coordination game that we're categorizing it, like originally I thought, we're gonna scale to a massive size and that's going to be great. But the way I currently think about it is that not really. Like I'm trying to make this distinction between MetaFam and Metagame, so that like right now we are the only guild or the only organization that is building Metagame, but with time we should be just one of many. And my thinking is that like MetaFam itself probably won't scale much beyond the 150 limit that we are currently at, and that we should just scale horizontally with the through inclusion of other organizations. And I hope that's a bit more realistic as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And even just hearing that little piece of your story, it's like, I'm glad you were naive at the start, because if you hadn't been naive, you probably would have been cynical and you wouldn't have started.
Yeah. That's the thing for sure. That's why I think we should not discourage this optimism naivety, because most likely if I knew it was this hard, I would have never started it. And the final question, although like pretty much the whole episode, there's been a lot of things that we can use, but the final question that I try to ask every guest is that if you had one advice to give for Metagame, what would it be? And you can take your time.
I think, I know. I think I've got it. My obsession with scale, as in the micro scale, is one thing that I just want to keep coming back to, which is like, okay, you might have this inspiring vision about how we're going to do society differently or how we're going to do organizations differently, but can you get it all the way down to the scale of two people and think about what's one relationship in your life where you could increase the depth of mutual trust and mutual freedom and mutual support? Like, is there one relationship where you can just increase the bandwidth of your connection and learn how to do that with one person that you trust? And then maybe next week you can think about another person, and then next week you can think about a team, And I think that's all of these organizations are just groups of humans, and all groups are just a big stack. Like my partner Nati always says, like a group is just a stack of human relationships. And so we've got the material to practice on all around us. There's human relationships all the time. So it's like, what do you notice about the way that you communicate? What do you notice about when you've got frustrations or misgivings or doubts, or like when you've got desires that don't match what this other person wants to do, or, like all of these kind of everyday encounters with another person? Can we treat them like a classroom to inform what we're doing with larger groups?
Right. Makes sense. Kind of what you talk about in your micro-solidarity article series. And thank you very much for coming on. This was awesome.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me in and making the space for me slowly to come out of being a grumpy old man and start to be optimistic about technology again. Much appreciated.
Awesome. Happy to have you.